This House believes that Ashley Bloomfield, as Director General of Health for Aotearoa, should always reveal instances where the government has acted against what his advice is regarding COVID-19. This can be done through the briefings which he gives regularly. Our past victory in this debate is proving to you that this is in better intent for the health of the nation. So I'll be bringing to you two main points of standard. First of all, how as a public servant, it's his role to be transparent with the public and be apolitical. Second of all, how it is better for democracy as a whole, as Ashley Bloomfield is to maintain this sort of transparency, as I'll talk to you about. So, first of all, Ashley Bloomfield, Director General of Health, public servant, paid by the public, paid by the taxpayer to make decisions regarding nationwide health concerns. He's not a political figure. So what happens if he stays mum when the government goes against his advice and does something regarding COVID-19, say a lockdown is ended earlier than he's advised it to end? Okay? He's becoming a political figure. He's associating himself with the government and showing you that by staying mum, he's not holding them to account. As a public figure, he's paid to hold government's actions regarding health to account. That's what part of what his role is. Let's say if the Labour Party was to say, we're going to come out of lockdown into level 1 in Auckland tomorrow, but Ashley Bloomfield's advice is next month, and he stays mum, that shows us that he's supporting that and endorsing that, and by staying mum, not maintaining transparency regarding what his professional belief is regarding the best benefit for the health of the country. Comparatively, also if he stays mum, it also degrades the public's trust in him as an individual and his role as Director General of Health. Why will it degrade trust in him? Because the public sees him right now as impartial, someone who you can go to trust. Why have we seen the nation rally behind Ashley Bloomfield? Because he's this impartial, apolitical figure who has come in and we can trust to make decisions that are purely regarding the best interests of our health. He's not political, he's there to take care of our health. So this creates many problems for buy-in if we remove this transparency from the public into the government and the national health plans regarding COVID-19 if we realise that he's no longer this transparent figure. So not as many people are going to subscribe to the ideas such as lockdowns, and compliance will go down if he's no longer this apolitical figure who's purely acting in the interests of the health of the country. What they're going to do is, what's going to happen is, if something happens where it comes out that Ashley Bloomfield isn't telling us the full story, the transparency isn't maintained, as I've said, people aren't going to be as compliant with the measures which come out through that. So, and on the other hand, Ashley, what if he does show full transparency? If he does show full transparency, that reaffirms our trust in him, it reaffirms our trust in the system, which is very important to have a cohesive consensus across the country for how we're going to tackle this huge issue. And if Ashley Bloomfield maintains transparency, is able to hold the government to account, then we can do that and have a better plan that everybody's working towards on the same page. That's very important to tackling COVID-19 as we see on our side of the house. Second point of substantive, how is this better for democracy as a whole? The opposition is made more aware of the decision making, meaning the public can be clear about what interpretation of it. Jamie, what did you write? How is this better for democracy? So, the opposition has made more clear of what so let's say something comes out which the government has gone against Ashley. The opposition has made clear that this is what Ashley voted. This is what the health officials advised for, and the government went against it. This shows the voters of New Zealand, our population who are affected by the decisions, that this isn't something that the government is betraying us. They're not doing what's best in our interests. They're choosing to use some other interests rather than what's it. So why is this bad? This is bad because then what we want is, we want our people to vote. So why is this good? Sorry, it's good because our people will vote for who they think is going to be achieving goals which are in best interest for their health regarding this COVID-19 crisis. If we see that Ashley Bloomfield has advised the government to do something and they haven't done it, and then the people say, actually, we want to trust a health professional, and then say, the National Party says, you know what, when we're in power, we will trust a health official, that increases the power we've given to our voter, and they're able to use that to bring in people who are going to support them. We maintain this transparency, and we maintain this disconnect between political figures and Ashley Bloomfield, the Director General of Health, as I emphasised earlier, a public servant, not a political figure. Especially with this COVID situation, motion, people need an idea of exactly what the government would do. And what happens is Ashley Bloomfield is an advisor to the government of professional health perspectives. So it's important that he's able to give this view and the public is able to see when the government has followed his view and when the government has not followed his view. How does this make democracy better as a whole? This makes democracy better as a whole because the public and the voter is able to see which government is following the advice of the professionals and the implementations which they're doing, how they affect the voter. And that's very important because then the voter is able to vote for the person who they believe is correctly following or not following the health professional which they trust. This debate falls all the way back down to how we see Ashley Bloomfield, the Director General of Health. We see him as a public servant who holds the interest of the people, the health of the country regarding COVID-19 at best. And that is why it's so important that he remains apolitical so he is not affected or affiliated with any political party and is able to make those best decisions and continue to have the best health for New Zealanders across the country. And that is why this motion should stand. Thank you.
Cheers, Angud. We welcome up Imogen to begin her team's case.
Alrighty, when we're talking about COVID, we talk about a team of 5 million, and it's become a cliche, but that's for the reason that it's actually true, right? And we cannot actually make any progress against it without displaying a united front. And at the point in time when we say yes, Ashley Bloomfield should always be telling us, when the government went against his suggestion, is simply going to create more division that's going to negatively impact our ability to respond cohesively to the COVID-19 pandemic. And that is our path to victory, that actually, we on our side of the house, we allow a more cohesive and therefore more effective health response to COVID-19. So going to do some rebuttal and then talk and then step that right through for you. So firstly, they've brought you the point that Bloomfield is a public servant who should be being held to account. Should be holding the government to account. That's the way around it goes. And he's currently an apolitical figure. Okay, firstly, when we talk about holding them to account, we believe that Bloomfield can do that just as effectively and is probably trying to do that, even behind the scenes, right? If the government goes against it, you don't think he's going to go, yeah, okay, I wish you'd listen to me, but I'm just going to keep quiet about it. Because he's clearly has a vested interest in the government doing what he views to be the correct health response, right? And so when he does this sort of holding them to account behind the scenes, then it is just as effective because, and actually even more so, because he's not sort of opening it up, airing the dirty laundry to the public, who are then going, maybe we can listen to him, maybe we should listen to Jacinda, we're not quite sure who to trust, as I'm going to step through a bit later on, right? And then we talk, and then they brought us this thing about how he's going to degrade trust and buy-in for the whole COVID-19 response is going to go down. I'm going to integrate that with my speech, we'll get to it later. And then about democracy, right? That, basically this is going to reveal to the public that the government is not always acting in sort of, with just solely health issues in mind, right? Sometimes they have other interests, which honestly we think is something that is is taken for granted, right? That the government is always going to act in with a variety of purposes and variety of perspectives, right? And when we elect the Prime Minister, we know that there are lots of different factors, right? And we understand that Bloomfield is important, but we understand that perhaps the government might also have a really key sort of, economic sort of perspective which is informing their decisions to possibly not do exactly what Ashley Bloomfield is saying, right? But the point is when Bloomfield just gets up on TV and announces that, and by the way, I thought we shouldn't have come out of lockdown, today, but really a month later or whatever, then that doesn't convey any of that nuance of the governmental decision making. All it sounds is just headline grabbing, right? Jacinda ignores Bloomfield's advice, right? And just continues to create division about what is actually happening in the government and how they're making these decisions, therefore decreasing trust in the decision-making process as a whole. Okay, so substantive point. Basically, we need a united front against COVID with some very clear messaging, right? Think about what happened when there was a screw up with the messaging about being tested if you're in South Auckland, right? That was complete rubbish. But so it clogged up the system. It had massive detrimental impact on people who actually needed to get tested because they were showing symptoms. But so to demonstrate what comes from division, from us, having mixed messages. Bloomfield said we should have done this, but Jacinda said we need to be doing this, right? And so what we So when Bloomfield reveals these instances and goes, yeah, they didn't listen to me at this point in time and this point in time, because presumably if he starts doing it now, he's going to reveal however many historical instances, right? Then it does three things. Firstly, it makes the government look really hypocritical. And, then trust in the government is always kind of like an iffy kind of thing, particularly for people who are on the fringe and already a bit skeptical of like, do we really need to be doing what they say? And we're sort of an issue, like we see, like, Jacinda taking selfies with lots of random people, right? Big crowds, and people go, oh, come on, this is so hypocritical, clearly not listening, right? And so this kind of revealing continues that. Secondly, it makes Bloomfield look like a pawn, like he's always sort of listened to when it's convenient, so when the government actually does, listen to him, then we go, oh yeah, but clearly that just kind of fitted with their agenda. But then most importantly, like, for the public, right, it means that they don't know who to trust. Because, they go, oh, Bloomfield said this, Jacinda said that, maybe I don't actually have to, wear a mask when I go to the mall, or, maybe I don't have to be sort of social distancing, maybe I'll just shake hands with the debating, people at the end of my next debate, right? Because, they're all, no one really knows what's going on. And so what we see from this is, they're only listening to some of the government's advice, which breeds conspiracy about, oh, maybe it's not so bad as they're saying it is, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. And secondly, it also is going to lead to a real resurgence of COVID because people aren't following the really necessary measures, right? They go, oh yeah, I know Bloomfield said we should still be doing this, but I really like Jacinda and she said I don't have to, so it's going to be all good. Or maybe they're just both wrong and I'll just do my own thing anyway, right? And we see that a lot of people are going to do this because people do get fed up with being told what to do. And look, because of this resurgence of COVID that cannot be prevented without us all working together, we see that this division being shown within the government is going to have a really significant impact on our ability to respond cohesively. And it has been clearly shown that when we respond in our own sort of bits and pieces ways, that we do not actually have any effective outcomes because it's just negated by the idiots who run around doing their own thing, shaking hands with everybody, right? And so because of that, what we see at the end of on our side of the house is that we get the clear benefit of improving the health response through having a united and clear front against COVID-19 that people can understand, and that is not just going to confuse them by having a whole lot of mixed messages. For those reasons, we are proud to negate. Thank you.
Yeah, the thing beeps at 4 minutes, not 5 minutes, and then double beeps at 6 minutes. But yeah, thanks for your speech, Imogen. We welcome up Jamie to continue the AFTM case.
I was worried for a second when he didn't have his phone. This is a return to the old Jamie.
Fear. Many would say that it's our greatest enemy. And frankly, in these times when misinformation is rife and people come at us with all sorts of different ideas and ideologies, it is our biggest threat. In this debate, we've heard that we should just stay mum. We should just hide the truth because it's politically convenient for us to do so, because it will help us. We do not buy this ideology. We do not buy this fear-mongering that no one is going to comply with anything just because we give transparency. I've got 3 points of clash in today's debate. Number one, who gets accountability? That's the big thing in this debate. Number two, who gets clearer messaging? And number three, who instills more trust in the government's COVID response? So number one, who gets more accountability? Why is this important? That's what we want from governments. We want accountability. That's why we vote them in. That's why we vote them out. So we get accountability under our model. Why is this? Because you've got Ashley Bloomfield going out there and being transparent, saying, yes, this is what I said and the government said this. If they are differing things, there is pressure put on the government to be accountable to that, to explain why they did that, and perhaps not to do it. That means that you don't have a government that's doing things that aren't actually good for the health response and being able to cover them up because Ashley Bloomfield is not saying what he actually did. This is what we want, this accountability in this debate, because it means the government is forced to go with the right health approach, which we on this side of the House, and I'm sure on this side of the House, believe is the right approach to address COVID. That is what we want. We get more accountability on our side of the House. So at the end of this point, I've proven that we get more accountability, we get a better outcome for New Zealanders and the health response, and that is which is our path to victory. Then, who gets clearer messaging? We've heard that we're going to split people's trust, and then they're going to question who has the best interest in heart. Again, this ties back to the accountability thing. If Ashley Bloomfield says one thing, the government says another thing, people are going to probably question that, and the trust is going to be split, which is why the government has to be accountable now, or they will get voted out. That's what we want. But regardless of that, even if you don't accept that, public servants are having their best interest of health then the political. That is the order in which they do it, because they are public servants, they are not political figures. He is the person to go to when you don't know who's telling the truth. Let's maintain that. Let's keep that, because it's worked for us so far. Then we also heard that people will pick and choose advice to take. This also reaffirms the trust in having government transparency. If you don't have government transparency, it only increases what they're saying. In fact, it's a benefit for us on our side of the House for them to say that you're not going to have people are going to not have as much trust now because there's a split in who to listen to. Because the accountability means that the government is forced to follow the Ashley Bloomfield's advice. That is the mechanism in place. So we are all united through transparency. Then we get what instills more trust in the government's COVID response. Now this is really, really important because it all comes back to compliance and accountability and having the best response possible. So we heard that Ashley Bloomfield saying something against the government degrades confidence in the government because of the varying info. So number one, it absolutely does not. If Ashley is explicitly telling people what his advice is, there will be transparency again because of the accountability thing. But why is this transparency good? Let's actually address this in this debate. Because number one, Ashley, as a civil servant, has a civic duty to tell the people, as Duncan said, who pay him exactly what his advice is. That transparency is really, really important, and it's something that he has to do. And then secondly, as a doctor with the patient of New Zealand, he has another civic duty, a medical duty, to give the right advice without any political tilt in there. And then the third thing is the truth is what we deserve. As people, we need the truth because otherwise we're going to probably not necessarily be as unified. So we heard then that you get more division in response under their model. So in order to get compliance, we need people to believe what he's actually saying. So why is this? Number one, the other team addressed this briefly. There's lots of conspiracy theories. There's lots of misinformation, as I flagged in my intro, around COVID. There's all sorts of things being said. However, what really, really isn't going to help in terms of these conspiracy theories gaining popularity is a literal government cover-up of what Ashley Bloomfield is saying. That's not going to be good. And you can say, oh, well, they're not going to find out about it. But you know what? They will. Because you've got Winston Peters doing something in the backbenches, yelling around, going, Ashley Bloomfield said this and Jacinda said this. Or at the very least, you've got David Seymour and the next government doing the exact same thing. You are going to have that political accountability there regardless, and all you're going to do is instill a lack of trust in people when you've got different response, when you don't have the different responses coming out and being told to all of the people. Then we heard that staying mum and doing the work behind the scenes, as Ashley Bloomfield is doing right now, is the good thing to do. Right, so doing the work behind the scenes is all well and good, but what we need is the people to be in the loop here. We live in a democracy. We need people to know what is happening with their government, especially when the decisions the government are making are so big, like a lockdown. People need to be informed of why that's happening. Otherwise, we are going to just have less and less compliance because it's just big government telling you what to do, rather than someone like Ashley Bloomfield coming out as an impartial person, as we want him to remain, which is on the comparative is not the case. And then inevitably, as I said, it will come out. The truth is out there. We just need to look out and find it. The other team, they want us to just close our ears, put the pillow over our eyes. But for us to truly be unified, for us to truly beat COVID, we need the truth.
Cool. Cheers, Jamie. We welcome up Andrew to continue his team's case.
I thought that would be a good place for your outro.
Yeah.
That's how it ends, not with a bang, with a win.
Yeah.
I thought it would be really good. Alas.
Mr. Adjudicators, we on the negating side of the House today fundamentally disagree with the naive and idealistic approach that the affirming team have presented you with. In response to COVID, we on this side of the House know that we need two things especially. A united front, and B, strict approaches. And because of this, on this side, we deal with the resurgence of COVID-19 best. We do not, and therefore we do not support Ashley Bloomfield revealing his perhaps alternating advice compared to that of the government. I'm going to be walking you through our case through three main points of clash, and that is Ashley Bloomfield's individual responsibility, and then also about the impact on democracy. So, what have we heard about this first idea from the affirming team today? We've heard that Ashley Bloomfield is a public servant. We've heard he has a job to be transparent, a job to serve, and if he doesn't do this, then he degrades the public trust and should thus remain impartial. And so we ultimately agree with the affirming team that Ashley Bloomfield is a public servant. We believe that he should be focused on New Zealanders' health, but because of this, however, what happens when he disagrees is the government seems divided. There is differing health advice from one source, which is meant to be in solidarity. There is a confused population who now perceive the government to be non-transparent. And there is less buy-in and compliance, and so that looks like people not wearing masks on public transport. That looks like people not washing their hands to the extent that they've been asked to. That means people not limiting their bubbles to the extent that they've been asked to. So as a result, we see high transmission and a bad health response on that side of the house. So fundamentally, why do we have Ashley Bloomfield? We have him as a servant to make sure the public follows the health advice, and that the health of the public stays to the highest standard possible. And so if the government decides to take an ulterior move, that means that his advice is no longer the government advice, that is his advice. And so I'm going to talk to you about some examples when we see the government ignoring someone like Ashley Bloomfield's advice. So we see this when well, first of all, no one wants COVID. I think it's pretty clear that Jacinda Ardern has a different approach to, say, Donald Trump, who's, has always been downplaying it. And so Jacinda has already taken bold moves. We've seen this. We've heard people on the right trash talk her a little bit at her approach. But at the end of the day, we're doing a lot better than other countries at the moment. And so disagreeing with Ashley Bloomfield in a country that has put so much importance on a health approach would mean that that decision had taken into account almost a utilitarian approach of other impacts. So whether that's economic or on businesses or whatever that is, the reason strongly a government that places so much importance on health would disagree is because of a more holistic view of the problems that they're facing. And so when Ashley so therefore Ashley's job as the director of health is to make sure that the government to make sure that the people of the public follow the government's advice that leads them to the best outcome after a global pandemic, and taking into account the other variables that are just as important to individuals' life, such as the economy. Therefore, it is no longer about just a health crisis, it's about the economic impact, etc., etc. And therefore, so I've stepped you through why we better meet his individual role, and why we therefore have a better health response by people trusting the government and complying better. So, talking about democracy, what have we heard from the affirming team today? We've heard that democracy is degraded as a result of a lack of transparency, and that the voter can see, thus, if the government follows advice, if Ashley's saying if they disagreed with him, and therefore they can make better, more educated decisions in the following election. And so our response to this is, as I just told you, like altering advice as a result of like harms in graded areas, and so therefore the educated decision the government made may not agree with him, but it is still important. It takes into account like all that's important, and therefore gives the best like holistic approach. And so pretty much when we talk about this idea of like transparency and people being able to see like the if the government like disagreed and then they can like vote them out. What we see on this side of the house is a bad decision equals a bad outcome. So this bad decision that they want to expose, like for whatever reason, we don't, on this side of the house, we prefer maintaining compliance and like trust in the government. And if it is a bad decision, there will be a bad outcome, which will be very clear to the people of the population. So like, for example, if Jacinda like decides to like shut down, like ignore his advice because of like greater harms from the economy, the people of like the public would see if like there was a really bad health outbreak as a result of Jacinda's decision to like take account into the economy, and therefore that transparency still remains on our side of the house. Therefore, this motion must fall. Thank you.
Cheers, Andrew. We now reverse the speaking order, and so I welcome back Imogen.
Cool, so the debate today has come down to two main points of clash. Firstly, about like who gets actual better response to COVID that's actually effective, and secondly, like, and less importantly really, like who has the best democratic outcomes, who keeps democracy healthy, all that. So firstly, who has a better COVID response? So line all down the app has been basically like, you know, Bloomfield is a public servant, his job is to serve, to be transparent, and you know, to remain impartial pretty much above all, right? And so we have had several responses to this. Firstly, we agree that his job is to serve, and in order for him to do that most effectively, then A, it means like giving the best advice, and B, it means deferring to the government when absolutely necessary, because that is how we get a clear message and a united front, which with him having a clear interest in preserving New Zealand's health, is no doubt, he's going to recognise that actually we don't get a good COVID response when people just do their own thing. We get a good COVID response when there's a really straightforward line from the government saying, this is what everyone needs to do, this is why, right? And secondly, they're pointing about like degrading public trust, and they've tried to spin it like a good thing because we're sceptical of the government, and we kind of like have a healthy sort of distrust of it. Look, we can go, okay, sure, whatever. However, in a time of pandemic, in a time of crisis, then it is more important than ever to have high trust in the government, or else like we become like America, where no one likes the government, and things go badly, like their COVID death rate is not even slowing, right? And so when we don't have public trust, we have told you what this looks like. People go, oh yeah, Jacinda said I don't have to wear a mask on the public transport. That's okay, I just won't do it. And it's these kinds of like sporadic sort of, moving away from the actual rules that that decreases our ability to respond effectively to COVID. And so what the impact of this is that we actually get like a really effective method of combating COVID because it's a united front with no sort of, chinks in the armour, right? Secondly, there was a clash about democracy. Like, apparently the revealing this leads to accountability and all. People were just going to find out anyway, right? Look, we say that we're going to have, because of this, there will be accountability both from like Bloomfield saying, hey, look, I don't think that was a good decision that you made, and B, from people like Winston and David Seymour going, yeah, come on, Jacinda, that probably wasn't like your best idea, without necessarily sort of announcing it to the world without any context, right? And we've agreed that actually I probably wouldn't even want to do this announcing without context because it degenerates our health response. And they have failed to take into account the fact that there are so many decisions in like a, moving a place in now the lockdown to various levels, right? And that, Jacinda doesn't just do it for the fun of it, as Andrew sort of steps you through, right? Like she's going to be taking into account what Bloomfield has to say about the health perspective. She's going to be thinking about, what's this like for small business owners who are, can't operate their shops under level 2, under level 4, right? And so by looking at that, we think there's going to be a whole lot of like nuance that's not going to be addressed by Bloomfield just going, by the way, they didn't listen to me, right? And we see a real degrading of public trust with no significant health benefit, right? And so for that, we believe we have won that point and won the entire debate, and this move must fall. Thank you.
Cheers, Imogen. For the final speaker of the debate, I welcome back Angan.
Today we brought you a case about accountability increased on our side of the House when Ashley Bloomfield will always reveal instances where the government has acted against his advice regarding COVID-19. We showed you, first of all, how the government are more likely to do good things because they're held accountable to transparency and they're more likely to act in better incentives towards the health of the country. And two, how people will know what's going on so they can use their vote more accordingly. We've seen a lot of mischaracterization and misunderstanding on their side. First of all, they just focus purely on Jacinda. We're heading into an election. There's another government which can possibly come up. So we see that they really is shoehorned into one thing. We're talking about more things than one. They've had this mischaracterization that Ashley Bloomfield should be taking into account the economic policy, everything that's going on into the country when he's making these decisions and advice about health. No, he's the Director General of Health. He will give you advice about what the health is of the country and how the medical side of COVID-19 is affecting. That's his job. And we see that even if he maintains this transparency, as we want him to do, and tells the country when the government goes against him, the government is still able to say, hey, we realise this is the advice, however, we chose to do this because the housing crisis. Okay, so the government is still able to do that. And what does this give? This empowers the voter because the voter is able to see, okay, this government said that I value this over this, or this government said that I value housing over COVID, or the other way around. And then they're able to actually use their vote, and this empowers the voter a lot more. And we see this as being really important. Ashley Bloomfield's role is to advise the country and the government on the health side of it. We don't see him as having any role in terms of giving an economic advice to the government or to the country, so we see that point as completely falling out of this debate. It's a mischaracterization which we do not agree with. We've also heard a lot of rhetoric about how the divisiveness that we're going to create on our side, and how people are going to be confused of who should they trust if Jacinda says one thing and Ashley says another thing. We see this as being completely unnecessary because Ashley Bloomfield's literal role as the Director General of Health is to give the advice on health, the professional advice. Jacinda is not a doctor. Ashley Bloomfield is a doctor. He has that advice. He has that training. He has that group working with him as the Director General of Health who can give him that advice about COVID-19. He advises the nation on COVID-19. The government is still able to, not at any point have we said the government isn't able to, they're still able to give holistic approaches and address these issues and say what they're going to value more than another thing. However, Ashley Bloomfield gives advice regarding health, and we believe that transparency on his end between the government and when they haven't followed his advice directly regarding the health is important for him to be able to do.